Good morning. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Maintaining Your Microfilm. Today's presenters are David Lowry and Maria McCashion. David is head of local government services, and Maria is the Records Advisory Officer for cities, fire districts, and New York City municipal agencies. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn the presentation over to David.
All right. Thanks, Rich. Good morning, folks. So this morning we're going to talk about microfilm. Um, as many of you know, this isn't a subject we talk about too much anymore. We haven't done a lot of training on it in recent years. And as we'll discuss, it's really it's a technology that's not half as popular as it used to be. So first, let's take a look at what we're hoping to do here. Here's our agenda for today. Um, Recently, the New York State Archives, we undertook a study on the state of the microfilm industry. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to share the results of that and discuss that and what impact it could potentially have on state agency and local government records management programs in New York State. Then I'm going to hand it over to Maria. She's going to do the second part here. This is how to care for your microfilm. And this is, probably really the more important part of the presentation. For those of you who do have microfilm, and I'm sure plenty of you do, maintaining it is important. You can't just, chuck it in the drawer and forget about it. And then, as always, we're leaving some room at the end for some questions and answers. So first, let's take a look at the state of the microfilm industry. Now, many of you know, and of course we know too, to a certain extent, that the microfilm industry has been in a decline, but we really weren't sure how steep that decline was, what state is it in right now. So we decided we really needed to conduct some research to get those answers. So the first thing we did is we formed a team of 3 people. It was myself, Maria, and our colleague in state agency services, Vincent Camizio. And here's what we did. So we conducted internet research. Okay, we found some good information there. We also interviewed a number of vendors and consultants. And then finally, we surveyed state agencies and local governments. And no doubt some of you folks out there probably participated in this survey. And if you did, we thank you very much for that. So just quick, a little bit of background on microfilm. So um, some of you folks who have a lot of gray hair like me, you probably remember at one point, this really was a top records management technology. A lot of people really liked microfilm and used it. And it was really great for reducing storage needs. So you can get a 1 cubic foot box of paper onto 1 reel of film. And in the end, you could basically reduce your storage needs by sometimes up to 95%. Okay. Depending upon how big those records were, right? If you had a lot of oversized records, but generally 90 to 95%, you can reduce your storage needs. Um, it gave you great long-term storage and preservation. If it's properly produced and stored, it could last up to 500 years. It really was actually quite popular with local governments and state agencies too. And I know a lot of local governments used to apply for grants for microfilming. And lastly, here, the state archives, we would promote it too as a good records management technology. And microfilm still has its advantages. There's still a lot of things I like about microfilm. First of all, it's eye readable. Okay, that means you don't need any special technology to read it, say you would with some sort of an electronic document. Really, all you need is light and magnification. So if worse came to worse, you could actually take microfilm, hold it up to a window on a sunny day, use a magnifying glass, and you could actually read that document if you really needed to. Okay. And it's also great backup for other record formats. For a long time, that was paper. And today there are people using microfilm as a backup for their digital images. God forbid they ever lost those images. If they have microfilm, they can still go back and read it, and they could also redigitize that microfilm and recreate their digital images. But they were in the microfilm was in the spotlight for a long time, but then imaging came along and killed the microfilm star, right? I'm sure some of you folks remember the old '80s song, "Video Killed a Radio Star." Well, imaging killed the microfilm star. Now, imaging, of course, is a great technology. Um, it has many advantages, so it's very easy to access, right? You could just sit in front of your computer, open up your software, put in a couple of key indexing terms, and boom, you call your image up. Um, it takes up almost no physical space, really. I mean, maybe you might need a couple of extra servers in your office, but that's about it. It's easy to back up, including to the cloud. And the great thing about it is you can access it from anywhere, right? If I think about it. So during the pandemic, many of you were probably able to easily work from home because you could access a lot of the records you needed to work with um, right from your home computer. You couldn't do that with microfilm. And also, you don't need any special equipment, right? A microfilm reader printer is designed to do only one thing, and that is to um, read and print microfilm, either print it to an image or print it to paper. So whereas your computer, right, you can use that for lots of other things, email, creating documents, communication with other people, but that microfilm reader printer can only do one thing. So we do know from the results of our study, and like I said, we pretty much knew this anyway, but microfilm is an industry that's in decline. In recent years, it seems to be in much more of a steep decline. So microfilm today, it's really almost unheard of in the private sector. And also, government has been quickly abandoning it too. So you just need to take a look at some large governmental institutions, such as the National Archives. They stopped microfilming years ago. We at the New York State Archives used to have a big microfilming program. We've given it up. A number of counties, say like Albany County, used to do a lot of microfilming. Matter of fact, I worked for the Albany County Hall of Records years ago, and the microfilming unit was actually the biggest unit at the Hall of Records. We produced a lot of microfilm. That whole program's gone now. They only do imaging. Ulster County is still doing some microfilm, but of course not as much as they used to. And some of our large BOCES, like the Capital Region BOCES, the Orange Ulster BOCES, again, they used to produce lots of microfilm. They've completely abandoned those programs now, and they only do imaging, right? So we do know that this is an industry in decline. Producing microfilm, unfortunately, probably as the years go along, become more expensive. So right now, there's only one company, and that's Fuji, that's producing the actual blank microfilm that you put your images on, right? Once you create those images, and it goes on that film. And there's actually been, in recent years, sometimes there's shortages of the film, things like that. And of course, if only one company's producing it, they have no competition, and the price is going to be dearer. Current equipment can be hard to maintain. We do know that there are some, at least some local governments, not sure about state agencies, that are trying to, maintain old reader printers, and it's hard. It's hard to find the parts. It's hard to even to find the people who know how to fix it. There just aren't a lot of people out there. And when you can find it, again, it's gonna probably be kind of expensive, again, because that lack of competition. And now there's only one company that produces what are called archives writers. Archives writers really started off as kind of a brand name. Um, I believe was it Kodak, or either Kodak or IBM created the first archives writers. Now there's only one company that does it, and I'm kind of blanking. It's called like SRA or something like that, that creates these. And you can see here, you can find a used one for about 20 grand. A new one's going to cost you 80 grand. So you know, those are not small amounts of money, especially for smaller local governments in New York State to come up with 20 or 80 grand is a lot of money. So that's one issue that microfilm is facing. So now let's take a look at the survey results that we did. Um, we put up a survey and we invited state agencies and local governments to respond, and we are extremely happy that 523 state agencies and local governments across New York State responded. Um, I was hoping to at least get 150, and you can see we got closer to 550. So for those of you out there who took the survey, thank you very much, because this data is very useful for us. You can just see here some quick numbers, how many people responded. We had a number of counties, almost 30 counties. There's only 62 counties, so almost half really responded. Lots of municipalities, school districts, fire districts were great. 159 fire districts responded to this survey. So, what did folks say in their surveys about microfilm? Okay, so first, one of the questions we just, of course, to ask folks is like, hey, do you still have microfilm? Um, and you can see here 100% of counties said they did. 75% of New York City agencies, there were only 4 responses, but 3 out of the 4 said yes, they did. Um, School districts and BOCES, 60% said they still, no, not still creating microfilm, but they have microfilm. Sorry. 10% said they weren't sure. So we could probably guess that maybe at least half of those people, so that's probably more like 65% of school districts have microfilm. Miscellaneous governments, more than half. State agencies, just about 50%. Municipalities, about a third, but that's not surprising to us. New York State has a lot of small municipalities, in rural areas, little towns and villages. So it's not surprising that a number of them have not used microfilm. The same thing with fire districts. Many of them tend to be small, not have a lot of records, so microfilming for them, may not have made much sense. And this is just basically a graphical depiction of what I just showed you. You can see here counties very high at 100%, then going down to the fire districts, which was only like 3%. So what we decided to do here, since fire districts are kind of outliers, and even though we appreciated their participation, it did kind of skew the results a little bit. So what we did is we said, well, let's take a look at the results without the fire districts. Okay, so that would equal 347 responses. And out of those, 154 stated they do have microfilm. So that's at least 44% of local governments have microfilm. And since some people, like I said, aren't sure, or we do know from experience working with local governments and state agencies, sometimes they don't even know they have microfilm. So I bet you this 44% probably is pretty close to 50%. So one question we asked was, how often do you actually access the microfilm? And you could see here, 20 said frequently, 32 said a few times a month, but it looks like the majority, right? They said rarely or never. So let's take a look at this as percentages. So frequently was 12%, and I was actually surprised it was that high. It's still a fairly low number, but honestly, I thought it was going to be like more like 3 or 4%. But so I found that interesting that over 10% of respondents said they use it frequently. Almost 20% said they use it a few times a month. So I think these numbers were a bit higher than we expected. But 70% here, you could see the overwhelming majority did say they rarely or never access their microfilm, which is not surprising because many of them at this point have probably using digital imaging. So here was, I think, probably one of the most important questions, which was pretty telling, is We asked, is your agency or government still producing microfilm? Now, these are the people who said, yes, we do have microfilm. So we just asked them to answer this question. Okay. So only 29%, I mean, 29 local governments said and state agencies said yes. 157 said no. So you could see here that is this kind of rusty orange color here. And you can see that's by far the biggest piece of that pie. And we did, again, let's take a look at the percentage because that really drives the point home. So of those 16%, of those who responded, 16% only are still producing microfilm. Of those that used to produce microfilm, a whopping 84% said, nope, we abandoned microfilm. So again, pretty telling, and that does show us pretty definitively the state of microfilm, right? It really is in decline. So then we were curious too. We thought it was important to know, okay, exactly if you did stop microfilming, at what point did you do it? You can see here a little over 10% said only within the last 5 years. About a quarter of the respondents said more than 5 years ago. But you could see here the highest number was more than 15 years ago. And then you can see here, actually the second highest number was not sure. So what does that tell us? If people aren't sure when they gave up their microfilming, that means it was probably a pretty long time ago. I think it would be pretty safe to take this 25%, add it to the 41%, which would then get you what, like 66% more than 15 years ago. And that kind of makes sense to us because we do know that it was early in the 2000s that a lot of state agencies and local governments were really starting to switch to the digital imaging, and at that point, it looks like a lot of them just gave up on the microfilm at that point. And again, that does show us that microfilm really the industry has been in decline for some time, probably the last 20 years at least. So here was a very interesting question we asked. We really wanted to know, what were people's feelings on microfilm? So why did you stop filming? Okay, so this was one of the questions where we said, hey, you could choose more than one answer, right? Because people sometimes will have multiple reasons for doing things, and we knew it would be the same with microfilm. It wouldn't just be one reason, but what was the main reason? Um, and it was very interesting because you can see here the most popular answer here at the top with 92 was they consider it to be outdated or obsolete. So part of microfilm's problem was it had, funny enough, an image problem in more than one way, right? People just looked at it as kind of old fashioned, like, well, sending a fax instead of sending an email, right? Something like that. The second highest, not surprising, said they had replaced their microfilming program with a digital imaging program. Um, but the third highest was interesting, I thought too. It's just maintaining those microfilm reader printers, which is getting difficult and expensive. So people finally just said, well, time to give up on the microfilm and get into the imaging. And you could see here there was a smattering of other things like it's difficult to find the vendors to produce it and the costs keep increasing. And then 33 people said there were other reasons that they gave up on microfilm. So next question we ask people is, did you digitize any of your film? So for those people who still have microfilm, we asked them, have you digitized any of it? Essentially, half of them said, no, we haven't. About a third said they've done some. 20% said they did most, but only about 10%, a fairly small number, said they've actually digitized all of their film. And that makes sense because there are some records that you just probably don't access that much to justify the cost and the time and effort to put into digitizing the film. If you're only accessing those records very infrequently, it might not make sense to do that. So those results, not too surprising. So then we asked those people who are still digitizing it, do you plan to start if you had stopped at some point or continue digitizing film? And again, you can see half the people said no, they don't have any plans to do that. About a quarter of the people said, yeah, they'd still like to do some more. And about a quarter of the people also said at some point they would like to just digitize all of their film. So taking that into consideration, at the end, we're gonna, try to get a conversation sort of going with folks about, their feelings on microfilm. But, some of the things to consider if you are thinking about microfilming is, so what is your situation? Are you a larger government? Are you a smaller government? Can you maintain, you know, digital images or can't you maintain digital images? If you think you would have trouble maintaining those digital images because you do have to migrate them long term to new technologies, again, you might still want to consider microfilming. Um, but, the state archives, we've never really had a one size fits all as far as advice goes for people. Our, opinion has always been give people the information that they need and sit down with them, look at their situation, and help them make the most informed decision. And really, the best thing to do if you're a state agency, right? We have folks here in Albany who can help you. If you're a local government, though, you can talk to your records advisory officer for whatever local government type that you are. So, but we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end after Maria does her part. So Maria, looks like we've reached your half of the presentation.
Thank you, Dave. May I have the baton? Thank you. Hi, everyone. Well, I have gray hair too. And when I was listening to Dave, I was wondering, was this how we were selected to do this webinar? I hope not. I'm going to be the proponent of microfilm in all its forms and tell you that it is still a useful format with many advantages. And I was speaking to a student assistant in our research room, and she thought microfilm was cool. She didn't have any gray hair. As Dave mentioned, it has advantages. It may last 500 years under ideal conditions. And even if you scanned it, it could act as a secondary backup for your digital images, but only if it's cared for. And these are some more advantages. It does save space and money, particularly if you have a large volume of records that aren't used frequently. If you can fit 1 cubic foot of records in one microfilm roll that's stored in a 3 by 3 inch box, that will save you a lot of shelf space. It can save money as a low cost preservation backup for your digital images, as Dave mentioned, and it is inexpensive to rescan if you needed to do that. It protects the information because it's a durable format that you can use to create copies, and it can act as a preservation backup for records or as a use copy to preserve handling the originals. It ensures file integrity because records on microfilm can't really be changed without some sort of a visible splice. You'd have to actually cut the film. It improves retrieval. Microfilm copies of records could be kept on site in a situation where original paper records are stored remotely. As Dave mentioned, in a pinch, it's iReadable, and there are still vendors and equipment available, including newer, less bulky models that can sit on a tabletop, as in this picture on the slide, and they have more functionality. So this particular piece of equipment is called a Scan Pro 2500, and its vendor is also on the image. If you can't see it, it's e-image data, and I checked on both, and they both still exist. So there are some advantages, but again, the microfilm has to be cared for. And I'm going to talk now about care and maintenance of film. If you want your film to last and be useful, just like any other formats, paper or digital, it needs care and maintenance. And to do this, you need to know what type of film you have, the storage conditions it requires, and it's also necessary to maintain documentation on the records that are on the film and also the format itself, and have policies and procedures for the use and care of the film, and check on it regularly for preservation needs to ensure, just like any other format, that no information is lost before the records have met their minimum retention requirements, which in the case of microfilm, there are often permanent records on it. I also just want to point out that here is another more modern microfilm reader scanner pictured on the slide. This model is called a U scan. That's a capital U scan. And I noticed the Crowley company sells this. The Crowley company is one company that sells it, and both are still in existence. The U scan model has different models at different price ranges too. And a couple years ago, we funded one through the local government records management improvement grant program that only costs $6,500. So grant funds could be used to pay for equipment like this, but also $6,500 piece of equipment might be affordable for your government without grant funds. I just want to point out that we do have regulations related to using microfilm to replace original records. Before 2008, microfilm was the only media that you could use to reformat and replace government paper records. Since 2008, microfilm or digital are acceptable. Both have requirements under the regulations of the Commissioner of Education, and these are some of the highlights. So if you are replacing long-term with records with a retention period of 10 years or longer, or permanent records, you must use polyester-based black and white silver gelatin film for the master negative. Storage of the master negative must be remote, secure, and the environment appropriate. This may sound familiar because this is what we recommend for the digital master image as well. Technical standards need to be followed to ensure good images are created and the film lasts. And targets, which are additional information that you add to the images on the film, need to be used in order to improve access to the film and also provide information that certifies and that the records are legal replacements for the originals. There should also be an arrangement of records on the film to improve access or to aid in access. And like digital images, and once the film is created, it should be inspected to ensure that it's good quality film. And then finally, like digital images, if you're replacing the paper, your government is responsible for verifying that all of the records are imaged and are readable. So as I mentioned, to care for your film, you have to determine what type you have, and these are types of film bases that have been used over the years. Thankfully, you probably don't have nitrate-based microforms. This was the earliest film-based base, and it was prone to releasing hazardous gases as it naturally decomposed. However, over time, if it was stored in a poor environment, it could also spontaneously combust. So it's a highly flammable material, and they stopped producing it in the 50s. It was replaced by acetate film, which was also called safety film because it was less flammable than the nitrate. But acetate also degrades over time and even faster under poor conditions. Acetate degradation is known as vinegar syndrome because of the vinegar smell produced by the acetic acid as it off gases. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this degradation in a moment because there still may be a lot of acetate microfilm out there. But most recently, polyester replaced acetate as the only film base stable enough to be recommended for preservation microfilming, as noted in the Commissioner's regulations. Polyester also does naturally degrade, but it's been known to last 5 to 10 times longer than acetate film. And as Dave mentioned, under good conditions, black and white polyester film is the film that may last 500 years. So acetate film could be fine for a long time, but if it's stored in a poor environment, what can happen is the film, which has a base layer, which could be nitrate, acetate, or polyester, but in this situation, acetate, and an emulsion layer which holds the image. And as the acetate film degrades, the base layer shrinks and it can warp and eventually break up the emulsion layer. And these are just some pictures of warped and curled microfilm rolls. So film in this condition might be able to be conserved, or if you still have the paper, you could just scan the paper. But if you do have film in this state, you wouldn't want to attempt to read it on your reader. You wouldn't want to put it on the equipment because it could cause more damage. You could contact the state archives and we can make some recommendations. So this type of degradation is a problem that you want to avoid because of loss of information. And it's critical if the film is the only copy of certain permanent records. Once the film starts off gassing, you can smell that vinegar, it can also contaminate surrounding materials to the point that it can damage film that wasn't even in danger of degrading. And the problem is compounded because when you store film, the recommended storage is usually lots of rolls together stored in a metal filing cabinet or metal drawers. And if left too long, the damage could make reproduction of the film impossible. So if you think you do have acetate film in your holdings, the State Archives has a publication on our website, on our publications page, that details ways to identify the film by sight and also through testing, and potential issues with the film degrading, some of which I mentioned, and also the steps that you can take. You can also contact the State Archives for assistance. And local governments and nonprofits can also apply for free preservation surveys and other assessments through the State Archives Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York program, or dhpsny.org, or DIPSNY as we call it. And there are also grants available to replace deteriorating microfilm. So just a little bit more about styles and sizes that you may have. Rolls, microfilm rolls are probably the most common microform. But then there are also microfiche cards that are pictured on the slide, and also a microfiche reader. Microfiche cards are often used for closed case files or other files that you wouldn't want to add information to, like permanent student files. And jacketed fiche is a type of microfiche that's cut in strips and stored in rows and sleeves, and you can add additional sleeves to it. So you can add information or records to jacketed fiche. Aperture cards are small single images about the size of an index card, and they're often used for maps or large formats or engineering drawings. And then we've got sizes that include 16 millimeter microfilm rolls. These are commonly used, or that this size is used for paper documents, letter and legal size. And the 16 millimeter film can also be cut up and used as the jacketed fiche. 35 millimeter film is used for paper documents that are larger than legal size. And then 105 millimeter is the film used to produce microfiche. And they can hold a fair amount of images. As Dave mentioned, one standard cubic foot box of records holds about 2,500 sheets of paper, and that amount could be stored on one 100-foot roll of 16 millimeter film. Whatever style of film you would have a master copy and a use copy. So you should create both. The base layer, if you're creating it new, it would be polyester, and the emulsion or the film layer will be silver gelatin for the master copy and diazo film for the use copy. So the silver gelatin is the security archival copy that should be maintained off-site in a humidity and temperature controlled environment. And it should never be used as the use copy because the silver gelatin scratches easily. Diazo film is printed from the master film. It's sturdier and it resists scratching and it can last a long time, but also only under good conditions. If microfilm is used as a preservation backup for digital images, you probably wouldn't need to create the diazo because the digital images would be your use copy. These two types of films shouldn't be stored together, one because there could be chemical reactions between the two, but also because it wouldn't be a very good disaster management strategy if they were stored together. So the environments for storage that you should try to achieve for use and master copies um, will protect the records from rapid deterioration and also prevent the master microfilm from being destroyed in the event of a disaster. So these are standards that you should look for if you plan to use a vendor to store your master copy, and also for the storage that you set up on site. It's important to have low, stable temperature and humidity with minimal fluctuation. So it can be a little warmer for the use copy, but low temperatures are important for the master copy. The room and the equipment that stores the film should be dust free. So dust is a source of scratches and abrasions on microfilm. An offsite location, as I mentioned, is necessary for the master copy. And security is also important if the records on the film are confidential. So the film should be stored in a secure room and in locked cabinets necessary. The film and its storage units should also have complete labels. If the records on your film are unique and they may be considered for digitization at some point, setting up these environments and caring for your film is going to help ensure a good digital image. So as far as equipment and handling, steel equipment is the industry standard for storage of microforms. And on the slide, you can see metal or steel filing cabinets with drawers made to fit microfilm rolls. These are shelving that we have at the state archives in our research room. The boxes that the film is stored in should pass the photographic activity test. So An archival vendor for archival materials will label them PAT rated. So they should pass photographic activity test and be PAT rated. Paper enclosures from microfiche should be acid-free, lignin-free, and buffered. And all of your storage units or the boxes that contain the film and the sleeves should have complete labels for access. You can see the labeling on the filing cabinets and also the copious amounts of information that are on each microfilm roll pictured on the slide. Film should also be handled by its edges. So microfiche and aperture cards, they have an edge in which there's no image, and that's where you should handle those. And microfilm rolls have a segment at the beginning of the roll that has no image on it. Those are known as the leaders, and that's how you should handle those when you should only handle the leaders when you're putting the rolls on the equipment in order to read them. And you shouldn't pull the film tightly on the roll, which can also cause abrasions to the images and the film. One microfilm at a time or microform at a time should be removed from its enclosure. So take one microfilm roll out of its box, use it, and then put it back in the box and then get another one. Same thing with microfiche. And I know this sounds really nitpicky, but if you've ever taken two out of a box or out of a sleeve, they look very similar. So to avoid misfiles, you just want to use one at a time. And fiche and rolled film or film of any kind should be protected from water because it's highly susceptible to water damage. If they were to get wet, you would need to remove them from their enclosures quickly. And microfilm rolls would need to be completely unrolled and completely dried before re-rolled. Otherwise, the film will stick to itself and its enclosures. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This could be a massive project if even one drawer, as pictured on the slide, if all of those boxes got wet, can you imagine having to take each roll out and completely unroll 100 feet of microfilm in order to let it dry completely and then put it back in the box? That would be a huge chore. So protect your film from water. Just like any other format, microforms need documentation. So you want to include information about them in your records inventory and label them completely for access and also for retention and for disaster management. Your inventory should have information on the film relating to the department that created it, the record series that's on the film, the retention schedule number, the date span of the records on the film, how the information is arranged, where the film is located, whether or not it exists in any other formats or it is the official record copy, and if there are any restrictions to the information. The labels should be complete and on the storage cabinets, the drawers, the shelves, the racks that store the film, and also on the boxes and sleeves. Information about, again, department information, record series, retention, date span, arrangement. And also, you might have a large record series that's on multiple rolls. So you would have information about the roll numbers. So roll 1 of 10, 2 of 10, 3 of 10, and so on. Several different kinds of targets may need to be used in the production of quality microfilm, even if you're creating a copy of digital images. So the targets are images, as I mentioned, that you add to the film that provide information to the user. And there may be administrative targets that includes certification and verification that the records on the film are genuine government records. Informational targets with series information, roll number, start and end. Correctional targets that identify and correct any errors on the film, and technical targets with information about things like resolution and density of the image. Just like any other format, policies and procedures for care and use are important. And these can cover things like storage of master copies. So if you're storing with a vendor, where are they stored and with whom? And any service contract information related to storage, imaging, or maintenance of the equipment. Information about what records exist on microfilm. This is important for your disaster plan. And also rules for access and handling. So handling guidelines, equipment instructions, guidelines for choosing and preparing records for imaging in order to create the microfilm, and also plans for the microfilm format. So for example, how the records should be organized on the film and what targets are needed, whether finding aids should be included at the front of the roll, and also how the labels for the film should be prepared. Just like any other format, monitoring is important. You have to check on the records, especially if they are contain copies or the original permanent record. And again, this needs to be done before any information is lost. It's important to have a disaster plan that includes information about what records are on the film, where they are, what to do if the film gets wet, who to call. So you may have contact information for the state archives or a disaster recovery vendor that specializes in microfilm. Ensure that the master copy is stored off-site and under appropriate conditions so that good copies can be made if needed. And storage areas and equipment, again, should be clean and dust-free. And ideally, you should periodically inspect the film. I mean, when you're regularly disposing other records and checking on your paper records, also take time to inspect your microfilm. Ideally, if it's stored under good conditions, at least every 2 years, but if you're disposing of records annually, you could make it part of your annual process. The State Archives has some related resources on our publications page. The publication on acetate microfilm, which I mentioned. Also, our Managing Imaging Projects publication includes sample targets, information about planning an imaging project which could result in the creation of microfilm. I think a microfilm specification and a sample contract as well. The Digital Imaging Guidelines provide standards for digitizing your microfilm. And then we're working on updating our microfilm care and maintenance publication. But in the meantime, our standards are in line with NEDCC or the Northeast Document Conservation Center. And their preservation leaflets and preservation 101 tutorial on their website provide information, again, in line with ours on the care and maintenance of microfilm. And I also mentioned the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services program for New York State, or DIPSNY or DHPSNY.org. So that's another resource for information about microfilm care and maintenance. And now we've come to the point where we want to ask you, knowing what you know now, do you think you'll still microfilm? Or do you have any questions for us at this point?
Okay, folks, so just going to see if anybody has any questions here. Okay. Let's see, we have a question here from Tom. We have many rolls of 35 millimeter land record microfilm that was produced for copy flow many years ago. This film has many splices and there was titling done at the time. Most of this film has now been digitized. Do you recommend creating new microfilm then should we discard the old 35mm microfilm?
Well, I'll answer that. If you digitize the film, likely you created a master copy of your digital images, and you're using those as you're storing those remotely as a backup to the use copy or the images that you're using on site. But as I recommended that you should also keep the microfilm that you have, as long as it's in good condition, as a secondary backup to your digital images. So you could be in good shape with two copies of your digital images, one on film and the digital that you've also stored remotely.
Okay.
So I would recommend keeping the film, yes.
Let's see here. I'll start from the top here. Tara, is there a way to determine the type of microfilm we have? Some of the microfilm we have was produced in the mid 1970s through the early 1980s. They did not follow standards with targets, etc. We have conflicting notations in the records as to what type of film it is and whether it is an intermediate master of a copy.
Yes, well, the acetate publication that I mentioned, the publication on acetate microfilm, provides you with some different ways to look at the film, um, whether determine what type of film it might be by sight, and there are also test strips that you can use to determine whether or not it's acetate film. If you know who the vendor was, you could check with the vendor who created the film if that's somebody that you still work with. And as I mentioned, you could apply for a preservation survey through the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services program that we have,
Yeah, I
or we
think
could assist you.
also, oh, sorry, Mary. Yeah, I think also, you may want to, whether I'm not sure if you're a state agency or local government, talk to somebody, see somebody at the archives might be able to look at it for you. So say if you're a local government, you've got a records advisory officer, and they could probably, help you out. You could sit down, put your heads together and figure out, what type of microfilm it is.
Okay, there's also a question here from Lisa, and it is are all microfilm rolls produced created the same way so that they can be read by any machine? We were informed that our rolls could be read by our division's machine, but not by the library's machine. Apparently, some adjustment was made to our machine at some time, and I was curious if we updated to a new tabletop model, could our film even be read by it?
I think that has to do with the reel that it's on, that you can change the reel to fit whatever the reel is going to sit on in order to roll the film.
Okay, and she just adds that the person who was their specialist on microfilm has recently retired, so they're sort of at a loss here, reading or using the film at all. But I guess they could
Good.
contact us here at the archives, and we may be able to help them out with some more details.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, it shouldn't, unless, like Maria said, they're on the wrong kind of reel, or perhaps we're talking about film versus fiche, something like that. Um, I'm not sure, but I mean, it should. If you have a roll of microfilm, you should be able to read it on any reader. Like I said, you should be able to just hold it up to the light with a magnifying glass if you needed to read it.
Okay, also, Lisa asked, could we repeat the name of the Scan Pro machine, and do you have an estimated cost for that model?
Oh. Well, the so yeah, Scan Pro 2500, and the vendor was E-Image Data, and I don't remember what they paid for it, and I don't know if that the Pro Scan only has, I don't know if it only has one model. I think that was sort of top of the line, but the U-Scan has a couple different models, and as I mentioned, um, I noticed that the Crowley company, which is still around, sold that model, and there were um, The lowest price for one was $6,500.
Okay. Or Laura asks, we will still be microfilming our local newspaper as we lost digital access due to ownership change several years ago. As we are a public library, we have one of the only working readers locally. Oh, I think that was just a comment here by Laura. Nick asks, are there any state or federal grants to be aware of to digitize film?
Well,
Well,
if
oh,
oh, sorry. Sorry, Ray. Yeah, I mean, if you are a local government, you can certainly get a grant to the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund through the New York State Archives. And there are some other grants out there too, Maria. I think you're going to mention one, or
Oh, I wasn't sure if it was a state agency asking. I was thinking at the federal level, depending upon what's on the film, possibly an NEH grant.
yeah, something like that.
Okay, let's see here if we have any other questions. I also was going to just paste in our information here, our contact information. If folks want to ask us any other questions. We have a question here from Chris. Does the State Archives believe that having an electronic copy in place of microfilm, is that acceptable? What happens in the case of a cyber attack or power outage, or the electronic backup is inaccessible?
Well, this was something I mentioned. If you are replacing, if your digital records also have requirements. So if you're creating digital records, uh, digital copies of your government records, or if you're maintaining your records in a digital format, you have to have a remote backup. So you should have those records backed up with a master digital copy stored offsite far enough away so the same disaster couldn't occur in the same location. So it shouldn't be on the same server that could potentially be affected by a cybersecurity attack. It should be protected elsewhere.
Okay, and I also just wanted to paste in our general email box for questions. If you have any questions later on and we didn't get to your question and you just want to give us a shout, you can always email us at recmanagement, which is recmgmnt@niced.gov, or just Google the New York State Archives and send us an email and we'll get you to the right place and we can help you out with any of your questions or issues or any of your training needs. Well, looks like we have come to the end of the questions. So Dave and Maria, any final words?
Well, I was just wanted to say something to folks. This is the very last webinar I will be doing for the New York State Archives. I am taking my pension at the end of August and moving on to other things. And I just wanted to say, bye to you folks who regularly attend our webinars. I've always enjoyed doing these webinars, answering folks' questions, and just say good luck to everybody in the future.
It's an honor to present with you, Dave.
Oh, thank you, Maria. I appreciate that.
You will be
Thanks
missed,
everyone
Dave.
for coming.
Oh, thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.